We're going to start from 19a on the bottom. It's actually the bottom two lines, 19a. So basically, let's remind ourselves what the Mishnah is talking about. The Mishnah, what our Gemara is talking about, started from the Mishnah. The Mishnah was discussing the laws of fasts for all different types of calamities that affect the community, and also scenarios where you're in danger because of a neighboring community and so on. And the Mishnah mentioned a lot of cases where you have to be masriyan, where you have to be crying out to Hashem. And we explained the understanding of Tosfos, Rashi, and Tosfos, the other commentaries as well. They understand this crying out to be fasting and blowing the shofar. That's the way we've explained it. There are other opinions. There's a Ravid, there's a Rambam that argue if maybe it refers only to fasting and not blowing the shofar, or only blowing the shofar, not fasting. But the simple understanding of the Mishnah was that we're dealing with both fasting and blowing the shofar, and all these scenarios we do both. Now, we also mentioned the general rule that's important to know, and that was that the concept here is Hashem is angry. This is a punishment. And because this is sort of like a specific anger from Hashem, we want to get right on top of it, and we want to beg Hashem for atonement, for forgiveness, and we daven. We blow the shofar and we fast and so on. However, all the other fasts that we spoke about in the previous chapter of this tractate, that was not as severe, because there we don't see it as Hashem's anger being ignited. Those cases we understand to be that naturally the way Hashem created the world was that there sometimes the rains come late. Things come late. Doesn't always come on time. So it didn't rain by this day. Okay, we'll start praying and so on, but in a much less of a serious manner. We're not gonna blow the shofar yet. Where not everyone has to fast. It has it's a whole order of series of levels where you reach more severe, you take more extreme rules to your fasts as time goes on and as it gets more scary and more serious. But the concept of it not raining is not looked at as Hashem's anger is fired up. Here, in these scenarios, we see it as Hashem's anger is fired up, and we specifically have to jump right into the severe fasting. That's the understanding of the way the commentaries that learn the way we're learning, that Masriyan means both you're fasting and you're blowing the shofar, which in the previous chapter was only done at a much later date when it didn't rain, after time and time again, and they tried already other methods of fasting and it didn't work. Now they finally do the Masriyan, the blowing the shofar. Here we're starting off with it right away, and this is the understanding, because here we are trying to answer the problem, the specific problem, which is Hashem's anger is flaring up at us. Okay, so now the Gemara said, it brought the Mishnah's case. And the Mishnah had a case where it didn't rain after it rained once, the Retiree Rishona, it rained the first rain. It stopped raining now for 40 days. And the Mishnah said that we are Masriyan because it's a makas b'tzoros. It's a makas b'tzoros. That sounds similar to makas b'choros. Makas b'tzoros. It is a makkah of food shortage. And again, that was the second line in the Mishnah, bein geshem legeshem. It didn't rain. between rain to rain. In other words, it stopped for 40 days. So it's a makas b'tzeres. Now, b'tzeres, keep in mind, means a food shortage, but it doesn't mean a famine. We're tight, we're struggling. That's what b'tzeres means. Ra'ev means a famine. In Aramaic, ra'ev would be kafna. Kafna would be the famine. But b'tzeres means it's a food shortage. It's a struggle. So the Mishnah had said this is a makas b'tzeres. It didn't rain for 40 days after it rained once, and it stopped now 40 days. It's a long period of time. And we expected it to rain, of course, maybe a few times in this period. And so therefore it's called a makas b'tzeres. So the Gemara asks, we're 2 lines up from the bottom of the page. My makas b'tzeres. Again, for those that arrived late, 19a, bottom of the page. If you're in the art scroll, it's 19a4. The final, 7 lines of the page of the art scroll of that page, 19a4. And so my makas b'tzeres, what does it mean, a makas b'tzeres? It's a plague of b'tzeres, which the Gemara's understanding, the question of the Gemara is, there's no food shortage now. Why are we calling it a makas b'tzeres? It will end up being a food shortage, but at this point, it's just an issue of raining. We haven't really dealt with the outcome, the consequences of this rain. So we shouldn't call it a food shortage. So the Gemara answered very simply, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Makkah hamavia lidei b'tzeres. It's a makkah. This is a plague that's going to lead to a food shortage. So again, it's not a food shortage, but because it's going to lead to it, we're calling it a makas b'tzeres, and it deserves to be masriyan, fasting and blowing shofar. Now, the Gemara is now going to tell us some things are called b'tzeres and some things are called kafna. Again, I told you a few minutes ago that b'tzeres means a food shortage and a kafna means a famine, which is much more serious. Now, what is the difference in halacha? In practical terms, the seriousness, I understand that if you have a food shortage, okay, you're struggling a little for food. You don't have, you're not able to have your 3 meals a day. You're having 2 meals a day. That's a food shortage. But a famine, I understand, means you might not even have 1 meal a day. It's a famine. You're having a piece of bread one per day or something. That's a famine, and or a half a piece of bread a day. But what is the difference in halacha? If a famine is here, or if a food shortage is here, what is the difference in practice in how we beg Hashem for salvation? What is the difference? So,
Rabbi,
yes, David.
in the Steinsaltz, it doesn't use food shortage. It says all this is a drought. It translates but Soros is a drought. A water shortage, not a food shortage.
Okay. All right. I'll have to look it up and see. The etymology of b'tzeres. How does it translate kafna? Famine. On the next page, for the top line, page 19b.
No, it says it's a food shortage.
What are you reading from, Robert? The art scroll?
19b1 at the very top.
Yeah, kafna is a famine.
Famine. Okay, and b'tzeres is a. So it seems like the difference between the art scroll and the Steinsaltz is if b'tzeres means a drought or a food shortage. But I'll have to take a look and see if I find any proof to either which one is more correct.
But it does clarify. It said when food is scarce in one city and food must be imported from another city by land, route, or beast of burden, the situation is deemed a famine.
Okay. Now that we'll soon see that Gemara. So, in any event, thank you for bringing that up, David. I'll have to take a look. But the Gemara is saying that there's going to be a difference in halacha between Batseres and Kafna. And Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, who's, I'm sorry, Rav Nachman, excuse me. Rav Nachman on the bottom line, we're now up to Rav Nachman. Amar Rav Nachman. Nachman says that Nahara Anahara, turn the page, Batzarta. When there is some type of a shortage and you need to bring food from Nahara Anahara, meaning you bringing via boat, then that is called a batzarta, a food shortage or a drought, if you want to call it that. And that's when you bring food from across the river. Madinta amadinta. So in other words, Nahara Anahara means like from one side of the river to the other side of the river that's just called a food shortage. But Madinta amadinta, but if you're bringing from one city to another city or one country to another country, sometimes Medina means city, or sometimes it means country. So when it's one country to another country, that would be a famine, meaning you have to bring it from far away. You're not just taking it on your boat and crossing the river. This seems like it's more of a complicated transport, and therefore this is called a famine. If you really need it, if you need it just from over the river, obviously we're not talking about the Atlantic Ocean, but we're talking about some other river that is obviously a little easier to cross. That would be considered just a food shortage or a drought. But when it comes to Medina Amadinta, if you're bringing it with a donkey across the cross country travel, that would be considered a famine, a kafna. Now, so again, the question is, so what is the difference if it's a kafna or a batseris? What is the difference in halacha? In other words, you want to tell me that one is called a food shortage, one is called a famine? Okay, shkoyach, you want to call it that. What is it? What does it make a difference? Why would Rav Nachman tell us this? So seemingly what he's telling us is that there's some difference in the way we daven. The only problem is, if you look back in the Mishnah, our Mishnah didn't seem to make a difference between Batseres and Kafna. Our Mishnah said even for Batseres, which was the less severe type of scenario, our Mishnah said, Masriyan alehen mipnei shehi makas Batseres. In the third line of our Mishnah, it says even for Batseres, you do need to blow shofar and fast, Masriyan. So our Mishnah seems to contradict whatever Rav Nachman is getting at. He's trying to tell us maybe Batseres, these things are not so severe and that's more severe. But the Mishnah basically says that they're the same halacha. So we must say, and this is the way Tosfos understands this, that when the Mishnah says it's a makas Batseres, that's a different type of Batseres than when Rav Nachman talks about a Batseres. You have to differentiate. You have to say, yes, the Mishnah is Batseres, and the Mishnah, when it says the word Batseres there, that's referring to a Batseres that's much more serious. Rav Nachman is talking about a regular Batseres, regular drought, regular food shortage. That's what Rav Nachman is talking about. The Mishnah gives a case of a food shortage, and the way Tosfos explains it, it's a food shortage that the Mishnah mentions that you have to be masriya and you fast and you have to blow shofar. That type of food shortage is a food shortage that's going to lead to a famine. It's coming. The famine is going to come afterwards. It's pretty much automatic. At this point, we see it as a food shortage, but there's a good chance that it's going to lead to a famine. And that's why in the Mishnah's case, that Batseres was a much more serious type of challenge to the community. And therefore, you need to blow shofar and you need to fast, and you do the same thing you would do if it was a regular famine. But our Gemara now, Rav Nachman, is telling us that there is a difference in general between a Batseres and a Kafna. In a regular Batseres, you don't do Masriyan. You're not Masriyan. You don't start doing your whole series of public ruling, blowing shofar and fasting and so on, making these public decrees for the community. Of course, people should start davening. You don't want to have such a food shortage or drought. But the concept of Masriyan, the rule of Masriyan, doesn't apply unless there's a kafna. So according to that, Rav Nachman is telling us a halacha. And the halacha that Rav Nachman is telling us is that when you just need to bring food from over the river, that's not a reason to be Masriyan. You don't have to make a whole prayer ceremony with fasting and blowing shofar. But if it's medinta, amadinta, then it's a kafta, then it's a famine, and then you actually do need to start making a public fast, community fast, plus blowing shofar, and so on. So that's the understanding of Rav Nachman. Not every commentary agrees with this, but this is the way Tosfos learns, and that's maybe a more simple understanding of the Gemara of how to explain this. Now, the Gemara continues, and we're now on page 19b, and we're at the top line. Rav Chanina says, Sa'a b'selo shchicha, if you have to pay a sela for a sa'a, certain measure, or if you sell a sa'a for a sela, ushchicha, and it is available, it's plentiful, it's shchiach, it's available, so then it's batsarta. That would be like a food shortage or a drought, which means it's not a major issue yet. You don't have to make a fast. It's expensive. Sa'a for a sela is very expensive. It's like saying a pound of flour would cost $25. That is expensive. That means there's a food shortage. If you're paying $25 for something normally costs $3 or $5, that's expensive. But it's shriach. But you have it in the stores. It's available. So then it's called a batzodas. Do you have to fast? Do you have to cry? Do you have to blow shofar? No, it's a batzodas. Again, this is a continuation of this idea that batzodas you don't have to yet fast. You don't have to blow shofar. It is a batzodas. Yeah.
He says here, Rashi suggests a second interpretation, that the difference between the drought and the famine. A drought means that one river dried up, although water can be diverted from a different river. Whereas at the time of a famine, all the rivers in the region have dried up.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to mention that after I finish the paragraph, but okay. Thank you for bringing in Rashi's second shot. We'll mention it just shortly. So so Reb Chanina says that a sa'a b'sela ushchicha, if you have a sa'a of grain, and they're charging a sela for it in a shchicha, that's a batzodas. Arba'a v'lo shchicha, if there's 4 sa'a for a sela, which means it's the normal price, it's not inflated. The prices are not inflated, but it's v'lo shchicha, but you don't have it available, then it's considered a kafna. That is considered a famine. So you have here Rav Chanina adding to this idea of what's a kafna, what's a batzarta. There's other examples. One of them is if the prices of food shot up, batzodas, no need to fast. If the prices of food are regular but it's not available, then that's considered a batzodas, that's considered a famine. You got to fast, you got to blow shofar. And Rab Chanina now mentions that there are cases where food is available and you still consider it a famine. So that's Rabbi Yochanan's statement. Rabbi Yochanan says that this applies when money is easy, is cheap. Literally, that means zoil is cheap, and payros and the food is expensive. That you people have money, and food is expensive. Fine, then you could consider it a batseiras. It's considered a food shortage because the food is expensive, but people have money. Money is cheap, meaning that there's money to go around. People are not poverty stricken. They have money, and then it's not a problem. Avol mois beyoker, but what happens if money is expensive? Uperes bezoil, and the fruit is cheap, or literally means fruit, but it just means peres. Means here just generally food is cheap, but there's no money to go around. Then it's masriyan ala miyad. Then you immediately do the masriyan, the crying out to Hashem, which includes fasting and blowing shofar. So the point of Reb Yochanan is to qualify what Reb Chanina said. Reb Chanina said that if you have food available, then it's never really called a famine. Reb Yochanan says, yeah, that's true if people have money. But if people don't have money, so even if there's food around, then if people don't have money available, so no one, people are poverty stricken at this point because of there's no business, there's no money, whatever it is, that there's no money to go around. So then it doesn't matter even if food is cheap. Even if food is cheap, people don't have money to buy it. So that would also be considered a famine, and you have to be crying out. Because Rabbi Yochanan says, now here, now I remember when there was 4 saw of grain for a sela, which is the normal price. There were many people, nefishi, there was a lot of nefiche kafan, people who were swollen from kafna, which basically means famine. They were swollen from famine, but Tveria and Tveria, midalace Isser, because there was no money to buy the food. So there was food, and food was regular price, but people just didn't have money. So that would also be a case of a kafna, famine, and we would be obligated to be masriyan, crying out to Hashem with shofar and with fasting. Now, I'd like to just mention that Rashi, as David made us aware of, there's a second shot in Rashi that the case of where we mentioned Rav Nachman's law about bringing food from one side of the river to the other side of the river, or bringing food from traveling on a donkey from one country to another country. So Rashi has another shot that basically it could mean that when you have an issue where a wellspring has been dried up, and you need to draw from another, you need to make a turn in another wellspring to bring the water to come to this area, or the other example would be that you need to wait till the river fills up and swells, and you're able to it'll bring water to this area. That is called a batseiras. That's called a food shortage or a drought, because that's not so serious yet. However, if it's medinta, amedinta, if it's an issue where the whole city has no water, all of the rivers are dried up, and you need to bring water from Amadinta, from another city, and here we're using the word Medina to mean a city. If the whole city's water dried up and you need to bring from another city, that's called a kafna, that's called a famine. And so it's just another understanding of the wording of what is considered severe and what is considered not so severe, what is considered a famine and what is not considered a famine. And so the example would be if in your city you have other options, just not in your neighborhood, let's say, but you do in the same city, there's other options, and you could bring they'll be fixed as potentially, that potentially to be fixed. So there, it's not considered a famine. That's just a difference of how translating the words over here of Nahara and Nahara, meaning that the river you're going to bring from another river, or bring from another spring. That's considered a batseiras, and medinta. You have to go to another city. That would be a kafna. It's just a difference of translating the words, how to Another example of this, of the difference between Batseres and Kafna. Okay, so now getting back to the Mishnah, really, because the Mishnah, now we're going to discuss another case of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah said, Yardu l'tzmachin avaloy le'ilam. It rained for the tzmachin, the crops, but it didn't rain for the trees, or it rained for the trees and not for the crops, or it rained for both of them, but it didn't rain for the boirais, shichin, uma'arais. It didn't rain for the water reservoirs, for people drinking water reservoirs. So this was what the Mishnah spoke about, and the Mishnah said a case, the law that we have to cry out right away, and we blow the shofar, and we immediately get right into the fasting and blowing the shofar. Now, so let me ask you a question based on things that we've learned today. How do you understand this? The previous chapter spoke about situations where it didn't rain, and we said over there that there's different series of fasts that have to be done. You start off in a very light type of fast. You start by day fasting. Then we don't blow shofar. Then then afterwards it gets a little more serious. You start by night. Can't do all the pleasures and so on. And then finally the last 7 fasts we do blowing the shofar. And how does that fit with this point of the Mishnah? The Mishnah says that it rained for some of the for the crops, but it didn't rain for the trees. And here we say, you know what? Fast right away and blow the shofar right away. Got to get right into it. Really? Here we even have crops. It rained for the crops. It just didn't rain for the trees. I have to blow shofar right away. Like, why is this so serious? I would think that for sure you don't have to do anything, because the previous chapter all mentioned that when it's very you take it easy. Okay, well, we'll fast 3 fasts. The rabbis fasted first, then the regular people, not so serious. Finally, after the final 7 fasts, okay, we get more serious into it. Here, all of a sudden, we have to fast right away. Why would the Mishnah be saying this? Anyone have any thought on that?
For crops, you don't need, I mean, the water doesn't have to be as deep as it is for trees. So if you had it for the trees, then it's enough for the crops. But if you had it for the crops and not for the trees, then trees will then try and extend their roots in order to find more water. And that in itself might be problematic.
Okay. Now, what would that be worse than if it didn't rain at all?
If it didn't rain at all, then neither one of them would be able to find water.
Yeah, that would be really bad. So I would think not raining at all should be worse than this. And the previous chapter says the opposite. It says not raining at all. Don't worry, take it slow. We're not in a rush. We'll have a little light fast. We'll do a little more mediocre fast, and we'll do severe fast. Here, all of a sudden, it rained for some, it didn't rain for the other. We're jumping right into the fasting, the full-fledged fast. It seems very surprising. Here we're making such a big deal out of it. And I understand what you're saying, Ezra. It's a serious thing. But if you want to compare it to the other scenario, it doesn't seem as bad as if it didn't rain at all. So why here?
The only thing I can tell you is I'm not a farmer. I don't know, what the extent is. So, I mean, I'm doing it basically on logic. I'm not doing it based upon the experience of a farmer who knows what is necessary and what's not.
Right. Okay. We're just trying to figure this out. So, any other thoughts? Why? Anyone else have any thoughts? Why would this be more serious than more severe, more strict, more dangerous? Why is it worse if it rained a little and we're making you fast right away and blow shofar? What about the other case? It didn't rain at all and we don't make such a big deal. Yehuda.
Yeah, maybe because if it rains a little, that shows that God is listening.
So very good point. I'm not sure if this is what you mean, but I think this is what you mean. That we see if it rains a little here and it doesn't rain there, it rains for this and it doesn't rain for that. This means Hashem is very well aware of your situation. Of course, Hashem is always aware, but he is
Right.
specifically flaring up with anger against you. This is a sign that Hashem is angry. This is not just a scenario where it didn't rain yet and we are not looking. But the fact that it didn't rain yet doesn't necessarily mean that Hashem is flaring up with anger. But when he rains on part and he doesn't rain on the other part, he rains on the trees and not this, he rains on this and not that, that's when this is abnormal. This means that Hashem is specifically angry at you. That's why we are making a big deal out of it. Thank you, Yehuda. Yeah, very, very good. Good point. So that's what the understanding is, according to according to the some of the commentaries. That's the way they explain this. Now, of course, it's you have to think about how that is. What does that mean? Hashem doesn't rain at all. Doesn't cause it to rain. It's not his anger. So why is he not causing it to rain? It's a good question. So the way they understand it is that it's sort of like Hashem. Sometimes, time wise, it's not Hashem is not in a rush. Didn't rain yet. Okay, but it's not a clear sign that he's angry at you. It just didn't happen yet. The rains haven't reached the time hasn't come yet. But if he specifically puts helps the others and doesn't help you, that's when it's a problem. The trees are not the crops are not the trees. That's when he's singling you out. When he singles something out, that's when you know this is flaring anger from Hashem. Okay, so let's learn this inside. So we're on page 19b, and we're by the two dots. Yardu l'tzmachan avloy le'ilan. The two dots are about 8 lines or 9 lines from the top of the page. It rained for the crops, but not for the trees. And so the Gemara says, Bishleim l'tzmachan v'loy le'ilan. It is good, I understand, if it rained for the crops and not for the trees, which means that that the scenario, the example would be that it could happen if it rained in a pleasant way, but it didn't rain with a razio, with heavy rains. So in such a case, the light rains helped out the crops, and the heavy rains didn't come, and they would have helped out the trees, but they never showed up. So here we see Hashem is angry because once it rains a little, normally it would rain. The normal would be that it would also have some heavy rains, and here Hashem is singling out the trees and not causing it to rain, and that would be the scenario where it's helping the crops but not the trees because there's no heavy rains. And what in the other case, the opposite case would be it rained for the trees but not for the crops. The example would be how is it raining beneficial for the trees and not for the crops? Because it's raining heavily, there's heavy rains, but there's no light rains. If it rains for this and for that, it rained for the trees and for the crops, but it didn't rain for the bayris, shichan, amaris, these different. The bayris is a pit, a shiach is a ditch, and ma'aris is a cave. That's where they would have their reservoirs, and for drinking water. And so, what is the example? What is the scenario where it rains for this and not for that? So it would be mishkachas lo das yirazi v'necha. That the example would be that it could happen where it rained razia heavy, v'necha and light, miutuva layasya, but it didn't. A lot of it didn't happen. So the reservoirs of drinking water were not properly filled up. So it says Eloha de Tanya, but this that it says in a brisa, Yardu lebayris l'shichin v'lam ares avalei ulazeh. What that if it rained for these reservoir drinking water, but it didn't rain for the trees and the crops. How could such a thing happen? So the Gemara answers the asya b'shfichusa, that there was only these heavy downpours, but then so it actually filled up the reservoirs, but it was not good for the crops or the trees. And this is where what Ezra says, we're not on the farm, we don't really know how this works, but somehow it could actually not benefit. I don't know how. If it rains heavily, I would think that it should help out the trees to some extent. It had rained heavily but somehow it's not helping out the trees, not helping out the crops. I mean, I understand it could ruin the crops.
The water is not absorbed into the ground. It's all runoff. It runs, so there's nothing that can be absorbed by the roots.
So in other words, if it's too fast, it rolls off. It doesn't get absorbed. Okay, that's a good understanding. So that's the Gemara now explained to us what the types of rains were, what was happening there, and that's where you have to note that, these are the cases where you daven. And I guess what the Gemara is explaining to us is that if you don't understand farming, but you'll know at least from this, if this is considered a situation where you have to daven, we have to cry out, we have to fast. So this would be an example if it just rains one type and not the other type. So we have a problem here, that there are going to be some problems with the crops. Tanu Rabbanon. The rabbis learned in a brisa. Masriyan aloilonis b'freisa pesach. We cry out for the trees that if they didn't get enough rain, when b'freisa pesach, adjacent to Pesach time. So that's when you would cry out for the trees. Ala boires v'shichun u'ma'arais b'freisa chag. For the reservoir water, to drinking water, that would be b'freisa chag, adjacent to the holiday of Sukkot. It didn't rain the rains that we need for those for the Bayis Shichon Amaris. They're not filled up with rain. So we would be Masriyan, we would fast and Lo Shofar, the Freis Achag, with adjacent to the holiday of Sukkot. Now, the Gemara continues and says, there's a little complication here with the wording. If you look in the Bach on the side, there's a word afilu, and they take it out. A little question of the exact version of how the Gemara should read. Because there's a word afilu b'freis achag, which I skipped because they take it out. And then here, vial kulon, there's another word. There's other words that they take out. If you say this word vial kulon, but then it says, im ein lahen mayim lishtais. Im ein lahen mayim lishtais. If there's no water to drink, so then it's masriyan aleim miyad. We cry out anytime, even if it's not a time of rain, even if it's the summertime, then you would cry out if there's no water to drink. Now, so basically what this means is that there's specific times when we definitely need to cry out, which would be like if the trees don't have rain in their specific time that it's expected. Then it says that there is bayris shichanim arais. You need these reservoirs of rain during, at least adjacent to Sukkot time. And then it says you would need any time that there's no water to drink. Of course, you need this rain. Now, interestingly enough, Rashi seems to say, and of course, again, there's question of the exact girsa, the wording in Rashi, but Rashi seems to use this the initial idea of Sukkot time to that it's not really for drinking water, because drinking water is all the time. So he says the Sukkot time point, in other words, when there's not enough water during Sukkot time, Rashi explains it to refer to lahashkis zraim v'yes behemtum, to give water to the zraim and their animals. So Rashi seems to understand that would be a time for the zraim, the seeds, to water the seeds and the crops. That would be Sukkot time, and the animals. And then when it talks about people, we have to daven anytime if there's the reservoir is getting dry, we got to daven. Now, ve'ezehu miyad shalohen. And what does it mean miyad? What is it referring to immediately? So the Gemara says it's a sheni v'chamishi v'sheni. It's a Monday, a Thursday, and a Monday. It's true that we should be immediately fasting, but we do wait for these special opportune times for fasting, and that would be Monday, Thursday, and Monday. And we mentioned a while back that these are auspicious days for prayer, and so that's why those are the days for the fasting. Now the Mishnah says, "V'al kulam ein masriyan alein ela b'parchia shalahen," and all of these we only cry out in the eparchia, in the country of that it's applicable to. The askara, and regarding askara, which is some type of a choking type of a sickness, or the throat is it's a breathing, I should say, not choking, it's breathing. It has to do with the throat, and it's
called diphtheria.
Okay, thank you. Diphtheria. And does that mean that it closes up the throat, like you can't breathe because there's like a narrowing? Is that diphtheria? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Narrow. So it's so the Gemara says that for askara, bisman sheyesh behen misa, is diphtheria contagious?
Yes.
So it says, okay, good. So then that must be it. So bisman sheyesh behen misa masriyan aleha, when this is a situation of death where it seems to be causing death, so then we are masriyan. Bisman she'ein ba misa ein masriyan aleha. If there's no death, then we don't cry out for it. Masriyan ala goyvai b'kolshu, and we do cry out also if there's another type of plague, which is called the govai locusts. Even if it's only a tiny amount of kolshu, we're crying out for it, because this is they could multiply in major numbers, and they'll take us over. But Reb Shimon ben Elazar says that even even for chagav type of locusts, we also cry if only a few are visible, and he's very alarmed from such type of locusts as well. Okay, so that's this brisa. Now we have another brisa, and the next brisa says, next brisa says we do cry out for the trees if they don't get enough rain, but it says only b'shar shnei shavua, the other years of the Shemitah cycle. Shavua here does not mean week. Shavua, often in the Gemara and Mishnah and Gemara, sometimes Shavua means a 7-year cycle. The Shavua, the 7-year cycle. The other years, shnei means years. B'shar shnei shavua, and the other years of the 7-year cycle, and not during the Shemitah, because during the Shemitah we are not relying on these type of on this produce, so we're not worried if the trees are not getting sufficient rain, because they're not relying on it. So it says, but the other years, the other 6 years of the 7-year cycle, we will cry out if there's insufficient rain for the trees, which basically is qualifying the previous brisa. The previous brisa said that we cry out for trees. And the truth is, it's qualifying the Mishnah. The Mishnah also said we cry out for trees. The previous brisa said we cry out specifically Pesach time. And here the brisa tells us, but by the way, that only applies in the 6 years out of the 7-year cycle. but on the Shemitah year, it wouldn't apply. Now, but then it says, if there's not enough water, then afilu b'shvius, and of course, even on Shemitah year, you do need water to drink. So then, even the Shemitah year, you would cry out for the Bayres Shechin Amaris issue if they're not filled up, if there's not enough water in the reservoir for drinking water. That's afilu b'shvius. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, afalei lanis b'shvius. He argues and he says that even during the Shemitah year, you also need to cry out for the trees. What do you mean? People are relying on other crops. They're not relying on the trees. First, this is they're not expecting much out of the trees in the Shemitah year. The Gemara answers because the poor people that don't have other stuff to rely on, they rely on these trees, and therefore they need to we need to daven for the fast and blow shofar for the trees because of the fact that the poor people do rely on this as part of their as part of their sustenance during Shemitah. So I guess my understanding is, I guess, that the trees don't produce as much fruit during the Shemitah year because maybe they're not fertilized and they're not watered extra, and so we don't really, people don't expect. Otherwise, you would think the trees should give just as much fruit as they gave the previous year. Well, why not? Trees, you don't have to, you don't plant anything. It's whatever they automatically grow. But I guess it gives much less fruit, so people don't rely much on them. But the Gemara here says that Rav Shimon ben Gamliel holds that the poor people sort of rely much more on the trees. So I guess that's the understanding, that they don't really produce as much because they're not worked on at all. I guess the trees need to be worked on in order to give abundance. So then the next brisa says that it adds another concept, which is called svichim, aftergrowths. So it says that what does it say? Tanya idach masrian aloi lanais. We cry out for the trees if they don't have enough rain. The Shar Shmei Shavua, other years of the 7-year cycle, but not Shemitah. Al Baris Val Shichan Al Amares Afilu B'Shvius, but you do cry out even Shemitah year for the reservoirs of water. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says Afal Ha'ilanais, even on the trees, you cry out on the Shemitah year, and he says Masriyan ala Svichim, and we do cry out for the aftergrowths. Why? Because they provide sustenance for the poor. So the wild fruits is one thing, but also the wild growths, like the different things that grow on the ground, that's also, he considers that to be something that the poor people rely on, and therefore we do need water for those aftergrowths in order for the poor people. Now, Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Prata says, Miyem shechar beis hamikdash, from the day that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Nasu geshamim timukin lo'ilam, the rain have become dried out for the world. In other words, rain doesn't happen as easily as it used to. The Maharsha mentions that there's a certain prayer that we say, we recite it in the Yom Kippur davening, but it was said by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur in the Beis Hamikdash for the rain. So we don't have the benefit, so to speak, of that powerful prayer that was said in the Holy of Holies, that the Kohen Gadol would recite. So therefore, the rain is dried out. When there's no Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, Yesh Shana, There's years that the rain is abundance, and there's years that it's minimal. Shana there's years that the rain falls in its time. There's years that the rain doesn't fall in its time. What is it similar to if it falls in its proper time, when the rain falls in its time? What is that similar to? To a master that gave his parnasa, gave his stipend, his payment to his servant. The master gave his servant his payment on Sunday. What's so good about that? That he has time to use the money to prepare properly for Shabbos. So, in other words, or for everything that he needs, I should say, he got his payment on time. He's not he doesn't have to do things in a rushed way. So he gave it to him be'echad b'Shabbos on Sunday, and that way he will be able to deal with the entire week in have everything organized properly. Nimtzeis isa nafis kitikna, the dough will be baked properly, v'nachas kitikna, and it'll be eaten properly. And the same thing is when it rains is timed, everything will go smoothly. Shana shein geshamau yardim izmanon, a year that the rain doesn't fall in time. Lamahu daim, what is that similar to? So it says le'ebed shenasan le'rabba parnasas b'Erev Shabbos. A servant, his master gave him his payment on Friday, and he's basically not going to have enough time to do things in the normal way because he just got the money. Now he's got to go buy won't have time. The fruit, the bread is not going to bake. It's not going to rise properly. It's not going to bake properly. His dough will not bake properly, and it won't be eaten properly because it's not proper food. And the same thing if it doesn't rain and it's time, so things won't ripen properly, and it's not exactly, it's not the way things should be. And that's when it doesn't. That's the meaning of when it doesn't rain in its time. Now the Brisa continues. Shana shegeshameha merubin, a year that the rain is in abundance. Mahudam, what is that similar to? To a servant that his master gave him his sustenance in one shot for the whole year. So if there's a lot of rain, the previous point of the Brisa was the rain came in its time, a year that the rain came in its time. Here it says, what happens if it's abundance? The rain came in abundance. So this is similar to Hashem, as the master giving his servant his payment once for the whole year. He gave him now early. So what happens? You end up benefiting greatly from having your money in advance. Why is that? Because you can grind so much wheat in advance, and all the little that you lose every time you grind it, and every time you need it, there's a little stuff that gets lost. That stuff will be much less if you do it all in one shot. Every time you do it, you lose a little. But if you do it all in one shot, you're only going to lose that same amount, and you actually benefit. It's like the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, because you can benefit from the large amount that you're doing. So here it says if it rained a lot. It's similar to an eved that his master gave him his sustenance all in one shot. In Nimtzu, it comes out the millstone will grind from what's a measure called a kar to what's a measure the same thing that they measure that they will grind from a kav, which means that you lose the same amount that you would lose each time. And just imagine every time you pour into a cup. So there's little droplings that don't, little drops of liquid that don't, little drops that don't come out. So every time you pour into a different cup, you lose all those drops of liquid, right? Because it just attaches, it somehow attaches itself to the cup and doesn't come out. So every time you pour in a cup, you lose that. What happens if you pour everything into one cup, so a whole year? That means you only lose a few of the drops. But if you do it every week, you have to. So every time you lose that same amount. So here you're able to benefit from grinding it all together in one shot, and it comes out. Also, the same thing as the when you knead the dough, and so every time you knead the dough, a little gets lost. So the same thing is when you knead it, you end up losing the same amount that you would lose from the cob. You lose from the car. You just lose it once instead of losing it every single week or twice a week or 3 times a week. You lose it once for the whole year, which means that you save a lot of money. You benefit greatly from this. A car, just to give you an understanding, a cob is 1/6 of a saw, and a car is 30 saw. So this is 180 times as you benefit 180 times as much. When you get paid in one shot, you benefit 180 times as much, because 60 times, is it 180? 60 cars 1/6. No, 360 times. No, somehow 30. Oh, wait. 30 times 6. Yeah, 180. So so that's the example of a year that you have, that you get your part, that rains a lot, similar to a master paying his servant in one shot. Okay, now what about a year? What is a year that has very little? The rain is little, not abundant, the opposite. So his master gave him his parnasa in very small measures. And Nimtzu Rechayim Asher Technes Minakar, Technes Minakav, comes out that the mill that they grind, you end up losing the same amount that you would lose from the car, you lose from the cob. Nimtzu Isa Kama Shenachels Minakar, Echels Minakav, the same amount that it would lose if you had the car, the big large amount you lose from the cob, you lose the same amount. You keep losing every time you have to knead it. You have to make your dough. You're losing. Davar Acher, another example. Another explanation. What is it similar to when there's an abundance of rain? It's the person who needs the clay. If he has a lot of water, the water, he has a lot of water, so doesn't use up his water. And he has good clay, it's needed properly. If he only has a little, so first of all, Mayim Kalin, he uses up the water and without finishing what he needs. And then the clay is not needed properly. So these are examples of what when there's an abundance of rain, what it sort of means in practical terms. Like, how do we see it? Is this considered a blessing or a curse? And these are giving us these type of examples of how to see having abundance of rain is like Hashem giving his parnasa all in one shot, which is a great blessing it's a great blessing for us. So and then the Gemara has another brisa, and the only thing is this is a long story. It's 11 o'clock, so I think we're going to stop here. This is a beautiful, great story. So stay tuned for tomorrow for the story. That's Hashem. Zai Gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good day, everybody.
Bye, everybody.